The grave question the Constitution tasks senators to answer is whether the president committed an act so extreme and egregious that it rises to the level of a high crime and misdemeanor. Yes, he did. We are all footnotes at best in the annals of history, but in the most powerful nation on earth, the nation conceived in liberty and justice, that distinction is enough for any citizen.
Aisha, we just heard from Cheryl how few Republican senators and other Republicans generally want to speak out against President Trump because he has immense political capital, a strong economy at his back. But Senator Romney, speaking about history and the choices facing the Republicans, what drove him to make this decision, the former standard bearer of the GOP?
It seemed like he was looking at not the short term here, but really looking at what he would be thought about long term. He's also someone who you said he ran for the nomination for president. He got the nomination. He did not win, but so essentially, he's been through this process. He's had the biggest loss maybe of his life. And so he also is independently wealthy. So he can take these risks, and because he's not depending on politics for the rest of his life. And he also said he was a man of faith. And he said he wanted to be able, and he has always been known to be a man of faith, and he was someone who said, I took this oath and I want to stand before God and feel good about what I did.
A man whose Mormon faith is serious to him, also the son of George Romney, the late Michigan governor, a Republican who was known in the 60s for supporting civil rights.
And I did want to pick up on that because I truly believe that Mitt Romney, when he says he's a man of faith, that really is driving him. And you might remember we saw another Mormon senator, Senator Jeff Flake, who spoke out against the president, ultimately concluded that he couldn't run again from Arizona, he couldn't win again. Mitt Romney doesn't really have that constraint. He's been the presidential nominee, he's been a governor, now he's a senator. He may not run again. He doesn't have to worry about his electoral future.
You also wrote a story about Lamar Alexander, retiring senator from Tennessee. Why did Romney vote yes? We've covered that a little bit, but why did Alexander stick with the president?
You know, I think Alexander is a guy who is not one to shake things up. Now, you could argue that there is nothing for him to lose. He's not running again. He's also at the end of his long career. He was an aide to Howard Baker. As a young man, Howard Baker famously turned against Nixon during impeachment of that president, or the impeachment inquiry. But I think at the end of the day, Lamar Alexander is somebody who is not going to be the guy at the front edge leading the revolution. He was willing to push for witnesses, but he was only willing to go so far.
Phil, you spent years covering then Governor Romney, his 2012 presidential campaign, as a longtime reporter on the Romney beat. Your impression of this week?
You know, I think finally in what is now his second year in the U.S. Senate, we've seen Mitt Romney become the Romney we thought was getting elected in Utah. He had spoken out against President Trump way back when he was a candidate in 2016 and spoke very strongly about Trump as being amoral and a wrong fit for the Republican Party. He then ran for the Senate seat, and people assumed he would get to the Senate and stand up to Trump from day one. He didn't. He took his time, but in this impeachment trial, he took careful notes. He studied the evidence. He took the process very seriously, and you could see him arriving at this decision. And I agree with Cheryl. It's entirely based on his faith and his moral center.
And he also said that he knows this is not going to be easy for him. Like he said, you would never do this if you wanted to take the easy way out. He knows he'll face retribution from the party and the president.
And he's facing it already. Donald Trump Jr., the president's son, calling for Romney to be expelled from the party.
Absolutely. He was a striking composite of two things, I think. One, it was clearly a very emotional moment for him, but it was a devastating indictment of the president's case. I mean, it was a really forensic indictment. And I think he stood out in that, his ability to do it. What strikes me, though, and watching this from a bit more distance, is how I am sure that a large number of Republican senators agreed with every word of what he said. And so the question that history will have is, why are they unwilling to do that? And one explanation is clearly kind of cowardice, if you will, an unwillingness, a desire to keep their seat, to stay in the Senate. But I think there's also something more deeper going on, which is that the president has been able to create an environment where he has sort of vilified the whole process, and it is a question of, you know, the liberal media, the liberals in the House, the whole them and us-ification that he has managed to do has given an excuse, if you will, to the Republican Party to stick with him.
What does the world make of this? When you're working as editor-in-chief of The Economist, you were just with the president in Switzerland a few weeks ago. When you're talking to world leaders, business leaders, what do they make of this moment in American politics?
It's really interesting. You know, I was at the World Economic Forum that the president was speaking at, and literally nobody mentioned impeachment to me. It was in the middle then of the trial, and nobody really focused on it because outside the US, everybody has assumed that what happened this week was going to happen, the president. And we all knew the president was going to get acquitted. And so from outside, people see, one, a president who is in charge of a country whose economy is growing pretty strongly, at least relative to many other parts of the rich world. They see a president who has kind of survived impeachment, who is looking pretty good for re-election, certainly, you know, as opposed to a Democratic field that's pretty chaotic and divided. So I think outside the US, I'm afraid the view is we're stuck with this president and he's here to stay.